set fire to them and make fun of it. And they are provoking and challenging the whole world to say, we can do this, we can get away with it, and no one in the world can stop us. No Israeli has found themselves sanctioned by the international community, by countries that have these tools.
Okay, I've been looking at quite a few things, trying to lay out the evidence so that all of you can see. Now, the ICC has sat down and reheard this genocide matter and have asked Israel to stop, but they have stopped short of telling them to cease fire. I mean, we're in a war here, but genocide has taken place, and we need to look at what that actually means. And this harsh reality comes now as to what this actually is and why a certain group of people would do this to peoples all around the world. Including what's going on in Canberra right now. So when we look at this word and we look at what's actually going on around the world right now, and we look at the actions of a war machine, and we look at who aids and abets that war machine, we could say some sort of complicity is occurring. Now, this question of Section 44 becomes a very real reality when the naked owner of the Constitution spoke up a long time ago, only to be ignored, only to be attacked by military force, only then to be attacked with propaganda, sovereign citizens, all being pushed by this federal and state governments. And when we look at the definition of this term genocide, and we look at the actions of this Australian government and its state governments, and then we look at the actions that occurred post-fact in a lockdown, we could say that they are complicit in a genocide here. And it's for all of you to realise, totally fully realise, that they have tried to wipe you out of existence. Wipe you out of existence in an agenda. Some sort of Agenda 2030. Some sort of foreign interest. Some sort of foreign power. Some sort of peacekeeping force that has failed to recognise your right of self-determination, bringing the United Nations and the ICC onto the table, because you as a people have that right in the international community. Being the owners of the Constitution, they came here to administer. It is an insolvent position in an indissoluble federal commonwealth. If you all stood up and said that's who you are, it can't go away. That Constitution belongs to all of you, and you've just seen foreign interests try and dismantle it, unwind it, and undermine it. And you're currently seeing a lack of you represented in the arrival of some foreign military. And you fail to recognise that as you serve that master instead. And you give up all of what you are, lest ye forget, because you forgot. And then when you forget and you forgot, it's gone. How are you going to bring it back if you can't remember? Is that a genocide, or is that you forgetting? Well, we didn't forget. We stood up before the courts. We said something. We pushed it upon the government. We demonstrated a right of self-determination, and they mocked and abused and tortured all of you. They mocked and abused and tortured all of you. And you can't see it yet. You have been attacked by a people that were obligated to protect your right of self-determination, while they undermined the very thing you are and tried to dismantle it and hand it over to foreign interests to you. And you can't even see that. Well, it's starting to become apparent now, isn't it? And those people that want to take it over still need you to go and defend it for them. Defend it for them, not you. And this is where you are stepping towards. It can only lead to slavery. It can only lead to permanent and locked-in slavery, where you can never build to own anything for yourselves ever again. You are being pushed into a corner and being wiped out, as demonstrated here by this Harvard article. And it's about time you started to realise the Commonwealth of Australia has been under attack, and a genocide here has taken place of the mind for you to never remember how to return home. That is a genocide. You don't know who you are. You're all questioning it. You're all running around scrambling to get out of debt, scrambling to get out of all these fines, scrambling to get out of the actions of this administering power that keeps committing these war crimes. And you haven't quite realised, through the fog of the fluoride, what's going on. Now we get nations that are the British Commonwealth of Nations at the present day. But we have down the bottom here flags and badges of Queen Victoria's empire with its royal standard and its Union Jack, its red ensign, the Australian national flag, the New Zealand national flag, the Irish or Eyre national flag, and the Union of South Africa national flag. We've got the badge of the Star of India, the coat of arms on a badge for Newfoundland, the Dominion of Canada, which you see on their red ensign, and then Victoria, Queen Victoria, New South Wales, which Queen Victoria split up from the lineage of George III into Queensland and Queen Victoria, Western Australia, South Australia and Tasmania. No London, because in 1936 Queen Victoria abdicated the throne in London at Canada's request. So the empire is sat from where? Melbourne, given that it's got all the foundations of Christ and the foundation of this royal standard sealed in the ground there for a British Commonwealth of Nations, where these bodies agreed to abdicate the throne of London away from them. We don't need you anymore. We are this. Is that what 1940 brought around? You were warned over many, many years. You were warned who you were, and you were warned to stand up for it. You were demonstrated to have a legal right of self-determination in the matter, and a right as a united people over and above governance. The engineers case proved this fact to you, but you still run around like Chicken Littles, throwing your hands up in the air, protesting and stamping your feet, because you haven't quite grasped what an administering power might have done to you. Okay, so what is genocide? Most people think it's the maiming and killing of people, but oh no, it is so much more. So much more. That only forms 268.3, genocide by killing. And when we look at this country, it is not actually killing, but it could be construed that way given the lockdowns and the poison. So here we can see a large list here of crimes that, very obvious to some of you, have been committed by this administrating body that exists in this Commonwealth of Australia. These rules wouldn't exist if they didn't administer. If we were a de jure country, we would have a criminal code of our own called the Crimes Act. It would have been an act legislated upon and defining all the criminal behaviour that's acceptable in the country. But this is part of a codified law, the Criminal Code 1995. And with all of these introduced Hague and Geneva conventions that an administrator is obligated to follow, we can see a large list of offences that they may have committed. But here we look at something very specific, because it is brought before the ICC, and this Australian government is obligated to all of its international treaties, conventions, pacts and agreements, and this would be one of them. So we look at aiding and abetting something that is very heinous at international law, very heinous in our own minds, but we fail to grasp the fact that this administration is linked to the hip, to it, complicit in it, aiding and abetting all of it, and using you as the fodder while it is doing all of those things. So let's have a little bit of a closer look at genocide. So these become international rules that Netanyahu have been accused of as a State Department. We look at subdivision B here, 268.3, genocide by killing in the Australian Criminal Code, and we can see that this may be the case in relation to excess deaths. A person, the perpetrator, commits an offence if A, the perpetrator causes the death of one or more persons. A 15% increase in the death or mortality rate over a year could be construed as more than one person. The person or persons belong to a particular national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Well, we could call it a religious group, but we could also call it nationalism. This nationalism pushed by the United Nations. Nationalism, right? National sovereignty over your true sovereignty. The perpetrator intends to destroy, in whole or in part, that national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. Imprisonment for life. So your Anzac are based in some sort of faith under the blessing of Almighty God, which gave a right to a national government, at which this government is technically an imposter. And that imposter, the perpetrator, did cause the death of more than one person, does belong to some sort of national or religious or racial or ethnical group, and did intend to destroy, in whole or in part, that national, ethnical, racial or religious group called the Commonwealth of Australia in the lineage of its forefathers, in the lineage of its Anzac. This government did attempt genocide by killing to remove a people from their own constitution. 268.4. Genocide by causing serious bodily harm or mental harm. Now, we went over command responsibility, and we went over torture, and we went over the mental distress and bodily harm that was caused by some sort of poison. We can see that that is continuing to affect people around the country as the months go by. The person, the perpetrator, commits an offence if the perpetrator causes serious bodily or mental harm to one or more persons. The person or persons belong to a particular national, ethnical, racial or religious group. Well, it's the Commonwealth of Australia under administration by external forces. The perpetrator intends to destroy, in whole or in part, that Commonwealth of Australia. Imprisonment for life. In subsection 1, causes serious bodily or mental harm includes, but is not restricted to, commits of acts of torture, rape, sexual violence, or inhuman or degrading treatment. We can see that this torture and this constant gaslighting and this mental abuse that comes out of the state and its media is very, very apparent when you look back on it. And they try and scrub this sort of data from the internet as time goes by in a way to say that it never happened. But it's very, very clear that from police on the streets all the way through to magistrates and the parliament itself, gaslighting and abuse and torture occurs on a daily basis. This is causing serious bodily or mental harm to a population and therefore is considered to be a genocide mentally. You're pushing people out of remembering who they are, which they have every right to do so. The key point here is that when they remember who they are, it is their own constitution and not this of an administrator trying to manipulate the mind of a population to believe otherwise. That in itself is genocide. 268.5. Genocide by deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. A person, the perpetrator, commits an offence if the perpetrator inflicts certain conditions of life upon one or more persons. Lockdown, jibby-jabby, mandates, all of these things relative to finance, the climate in which you live, food, health. I mean, the list goes on here in the way that you've been treated. And the key thing here would be this court case in America, which proves that what they've done to your water is actually a crime. The person or persons belong to a particular national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, administration. The perpetrator intends to destroy, in whole or in part, that Commonwealth of Australia, its Anzacs, its Christianity. And the conditions of life are intended to bring about physical destruction of that group in whole or in part, with those United Nations police force shooting gas canisters and non-lethal weapons at innocent civilians while they stood on their own king's domain, flying the colours of that king. It's very clear that the government has committed this act of physical destruction and is willingly there to put its militarised forces and its sales mechanisms into Melbourne and defend that whole ideal of commercial activity with the full force of the United Nations and all of their non-lethal weapons. This is stepping into the bounds of a full Nazified military force against the very population inside this Commonwealth of Australia, directly demonstrating that a willful act of genocide is actually occurring by stopping a people from returning to their king's domain and the line of authority given to them by their forefathers, a right of self-determination back to the very constitution they own, while administrators try to give it away to someone else in an act of genocide. Now, I have this video that seems to be doing the rounds on the Twitter. Let's play it first, but I'd like to point out that I believe this is an AI voice made to look like Alan Jones. There is a one-word slip-up that a normal man wouldn't make. A computer might make that mistake. But let's have a look at that quickly before we return back to 268.6.
TGA desperately tried to prevent this document being released under freedom of information. The Australian Federal Police should be down at the TGA this morning, seizing their computers and phones and starting to take people into custody. Would have anyone in their right mind injected this stuff into their body if they knew the mRNA would spread to their brain, liver and bone marrow, and female ovaries? The TGA knew that the Pfizer pregnancy trials on mice found a doubling of pre-implantation loss in the injected group compared to the control group. And the TGA kept this quiet and tried to hide the data, including the fact that lipid nanoparticles, including the mRNA, secreted in the ovaries, all while telling women considering having children that the shots were safe and effective. This is a crime, and experts are wondering why there's been a significant fall in birth rates in highly vaccinated countries. How many women trying to fall pregnant would have injected these experimental genetic agents into their body if they knew what the TGA knew? The Federal Police should be down raiding the TGA's offices and seizing their computers and phones. First to be arrested is the despicable, lying TGA boss, Professor John Skerritt, who announced his retirement for April 2023. The rats are leaving the Sinkang ship. If Skerritt thinks he's getting away scot-free, or he can obfuscate his way out of this, he's got another thing coming. He's not going to Port Macquarie fishing in retirement. The scum Skerritt is going to Long Bay Jail for a long stretch. The Australian people are furious. Loved ones have been harmed and killed, and couples will be unable to have children because of Skerritt and the politicians and other bureaucrats with whom Skerritt conspired. This is the crime of the century.
The world is engaged in the largest clinical trial, the largest global vaccination trial ever, and we will have enormous amounts of data. But what's the message for the public? It's safe, it's effective, it will help protect you, but it will also help protect your mum and dad, your grandparents, your nonna, all of Australia.
Crazy experiment, right? Where they could gather all the stats post-fact and then hide them from you. Now, it does seem like AI, but it's a very credible claim, and it really needs to be followed up. And this should be something that should be before the Parliament, but they seem to chinwag their way out of it all the time, which means that only the military police need to step in and start arresting these ministers who took some sort of oath to act in some sort of military command. That's about the sum of it, really, because now we look at 268.6, genocide by imposing measures intended to prevent births. A person, the perpetrator, commits an offence if the perpetrator imposes certain measures upon one or more persons. The person or persons belong to a particular Commonwealth of Australia under the blessing of Almighty God. In their Christian right, the perpetrator intends to destroy, in whole or in part, that Commonwealth of Australia and its bloodline inheritance, and then take it from you and make threats that you would own nothing. The measures imposed are intended to prevent births within that group, that experimented on group, where they collected statistics that might prove that they've committed some sort of heinous, serious, high-level international offence. Now, when we look at the diaspora of warfare, they are directly complicit in the actions of that diaspora, causing the relocation of not only in an external sense from country to country, but internally displaced persons are a thing with the United Nations, caused by the very machine you're seeing go to some real-world international conflict right now, because it's trying to manipulate the situation to keep maintenance of all of these things in all of your countries, in all of your countries. This is a very real thing that all of you need to wake up to as these woke children of the government, realizing that they have actually attacked you and committed heinous criminal offences might actually switch your brain into actually stepping up and doing something about it.
First, Indigenous activists had vowed they will squat in Melbourne's CBD until the King's Domain parkland is given to them. Now, the parkland includes the Shrine of Remembrance and the Maya Music Bowl. It also features a memorial to 38 Aboriginal people whose remains were reburied there in 1985. The activists are led by Robbie Thorpe. Now, he's the uncle of Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe, and they're demanding, amongst other things, a stone hut be created in the parklands for Indigenous purposes, and that the area is renamed, omitting all references to the King and what they call the Windsor crime family. Now, Lydia Thorpe was there today and she spoke to Melbourne Radio. She said, "This is about sovereignty. The whole notion of sovereignty in this country has never been resolved. It's a peaceful sit-in on country where we practice our sovereign rights on our own country." Here's another clip of Lydia Thorpe talking about sovereignty and how she sees the situation.
This is a war!
Now, I've got to admit, Caleb and Liz, I'm a little bit sympathetic to these activists, because have they not been encouraged or even created by governments, woke corporations and even woke religious groups? Remember NAIDOC Week, and we have taxpayer funding for NAIDOC Week every year, where they repeat over and over ad nauseum the slogan, "Always was, always will be Aboriginal land." I remember going to church and they had "always was, always will be Aboriginal land" on the screens. I don't know why you go to church to learn what the load of social justice issue is.
What are they worshipping?
But I'm thinking, if we really believe this, shouldn't we all exit the building and hand over the land? Or here's Anthony Albanese, our now Prime Minister, speaking 2 years ago in Parliament.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I begin by acknowledging that we meet on the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, land that was, is and always will be Aboriginal land.
So aren't these activists really just taking woke corporations, the woke Prime Minister at his word? Or what about this? They want the King's Domain given to them. I didn't know too much about the King's Domain, so I went on the Victorian Government website today to find out what is the King's Domain in Melbourne Parklands. And at the bottom of the page on the Victorian Government website, they have an acknowledgement of country where they talk about the, quote, unbroken spiritual, cultural and political connection of Indigenous people to the King's Domain that has existed for, and they actually say, 2,000 generations. I'm not quite sure how they worked that out.
That's some math.
Here's my point. These activists, I'm no longer really that angry or annoyed at them, because they're not the biggest problem here. The biggest problem has been created by our political and cultural elites who keep saying things that they don't mean.
Well, that's true. Well, I don't know that they created it. They've certainly enabled it, and they allow it to continue to go on. Yeah, exactly.
Inflamed it.
But it is fundamentally driven by a small group of nutcases in the Aboriginal community who believe believe that sovereignty was never ceded and they still have claim to the land, right?
But aren't they taking the Prime Minister at his word?
Yes, but when they say always was, always will be, we get the implication, but we all know it's not the truth, right? Even those who say it know it's not the truth. It's a slogan to shout at a rally or whatever it might be. But if he wants to stay there in his tent forever and a day, which is what Mr Thorpe has threatened to do, that's exactly where he's going to be, because they're never going to give King's Domain back to Aboriginal people. It's one of the most significant parks in Melbourne. And now Melbourne viewers will understand what I say.
So, a harsh reality, right? An awakening, a wake-up call from being woke to finally being awake and realising this is sort of a hard thing for your country to go through. And without that loyalty for your country, you're seeing what's going on in Parliament when Albanese giggles about your homes and the fact that you want your electricity grid back.
Apparently now we're going after the family home. The family home. The family home. We're going after the family home. You know, according to them, we're going to go in and there'll be a knock on the door and they'll go, here we are, we're the government, we're here to take your home from you. We're going to nationalise the home. The only political party that I've seen talking about mass nationalisation is those opposite who want to nationalise the energy network and then they want to intervene in the market to nationalise the supermarkets when they're forced to sell. The family home...
Oh, they want to nationalise the electricity grid. No, we don't. We want you to stop the retail electricity and we want you to return it to wholesale. And we want you to give all of the residential in that wholesale free electricity across the board, Albo, across the board. It wasn't a request, it was kind of a demand that you return to the people what belongs to the people while you sit there and try and undermine the people and giggle about it, Albo, and giggle about it without any reflection on all of these Defence Force men that defended something in God and their forefathers, and they look at all of you and say they won't defend. So I ask of you, Albo, where's your Aboriginal Defence Force if you want to govern? That's a stark reality when all of these military posts were put along the Queensland coast to defend everyone, including the Aborigine. So Albo's playing a game with everyone, and it's up to you to realise that game is a game of manipulating you out of everything you are so that you'll own nothing and be not a people and be genocided out of existence by mind and by property. By mind and by property. And you've already seen that infiltration into farming, agriculture. And why would that be? A government flexing its ability with some sort of cultural right while ignoring the very culture that exists in the Constitution that we are. God, King and country. They can't take the Constitution away from the lawful sovereign who anchored and created and put on the courtroom record a self-determinable right to hold what belongs to the people and not an administrative government. And not an administrative government. So the harsh reality for all of you is that you've been administered out of everything you are, and now they're working on administering you out of your mind, so that you forget your Anzac and you push them to the side, and 102,000 dead Australians that defended that Constitution don't matter anymore. Don't matter anymore. And that's what ScoMo and Albo put together inside that executive branch of government with this command line that has created and gone through grave war crimes to get their stuff done. And they thought everyone would be silent on their war crimes. But instead, a Brereton report happened, didn't it? Because someone stood up and defended a country, giving a judge a right to see through the mirror. And you lot haven't worked this out yet, that this all fits together. There is a reason a justice was able to choose through two sides. Who put one of those sides on the table so that those justices could acknowledge it? Who created a situation where an administrator could be pointed out for its crimes? All of you participated in that by consecrating a flag in 9 major cities and over 50 towns across the country. You demonstrated to a government who you were as a people, demonstrating to what is administration under international rules, that they were obligated to those international rules. And it brought around a Brereton report, and it brought around the requirement for the federal police to take the report of war crimes. It brought around this realization that you are being attacked by people in this government who have committed international criminal offences along the way. And the harsh reality is that unless you step up to the plate, you, all of you, will let them get away with it. You'll let them get away with some of the most heinous war crimes that have ever occurred on this planet. On this planet. Worse than what we saw in World War II. Far, 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 far worse, given that you all got locked down and poisoned.
We can't kid ourselves when they said forced industrial revolution. We can't kid ourselves when they said fourth industrial revolution. And we can't kid ourselves when they used an experiment with some sort of modus operandi attached behind it. Put everyone into a digital world, transfer all of their property into a digital world, transfer all of their identification and all of their records into a digital world, put it on a cloud server in the United States, put it on a cloud server external to your own lands, making it not of you, because there is a serious national security issue if you can ping your My Health record all the way through those networks. There's a serious issue here when your DNA will become your data. There is a serious issue here when United States courts determined what was patentable gene technology. There is a serious issue here when people behind government use corporate identities to secure their freedom from repercussions to some seriously harmful effects that they themselves create. We can see a modus operandi here of putting some sort of cattle tag identity into your DNA. And it's a patentable string of DNA that is non-natural, which is why it can be patented. And all of these things add up together to being able to identify you as one of their cattle, to access their digital world where they will control all of the markets with their digital technologies. They'll use AI and a system like in China to lock you down. They'll follow you with cameras. They won't let you buy anything without your little chip. It's the Satanist mark of the beast right inside the executive branches of this Australian government. We are looking at something very heinous and very serious, which goes against every rule that they were supposed to follow while they tried to corporatize you all into a world that doesn't exist in the real world.
So the harsh reality is it's on the courtroom record. The harsh reality is that they are war criminals. The harsh reality is that you've been serving those war criminals not knowing. The harsh reality is that those war criminals have committed crimes here on Australian soil, all the way down into their state command. And we've connected that command to a command responsibility, demonstrated to have participated in some of the most heinous culture inside our government and its departments ever. Bastardisation of new recruits that they call employees. The most disgusting form of abuse and torture that could ever take place had become a culture under this administration because it didn't give a crap about the people it administered. So I'll leave you to think about the fluoride they fed you in the prison camp you live in while they dismantle you and put you through genocide. I want you to think about you sitting on your hands, all fluoridated, doing nothing. When all of you tried to be better than each other, all it took was to unite and defend. You didn't need to know everything to defend. You didn't need your butcher to become a lawyer to defend. You just needed his brotherhood standing next to you in numbers to speak up, united in a federal commonwealth.